Hey everyone, today we're walking through a memory that doesn't belong to you anymore, but somehow still follows her around. It's tucked inside a song that plays at the wrong time. It hides in the way a stranger's voice sounds like yours. It lingers in her chest like a feeling she can't quite name. And if you think you can control how others feel about you, then maybe that's exactly what you haven't let go of yet. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is over there. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some soft background noise, and let's begin today's journey together. You weren't just a boyfriend. You weren't just another chapter in her life. You were the man she wasn't ready to meet and still isn't ready to forget. The kind of man who, without trying, makes a woman sit up straight months later in the middle of a random conversation because something reminded her of you. It's not always dramatic. No crying on the bathroom floor, no midnight phone calls. It's quieter than that. The regret doesn't scream, it simmers. It shows up when she meets someone new and feels less, less known, less safe, less understood. Because here's the truth. No one says out loud. Most people aren't really missed. They're replaced. Routines swap. New habits form. But some people, some rare ones, leave a space that nothing quite fills, not even time. And if that's who you were, you probably didn't know it while it was happening. You weren't performing. You weren't acting like some character from a How to Get the Girl podcast. You were just being solid, present, real. And that, ironically, is exactly why she remembers you. Let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a room that still smelled like someone who left hours ago? That's you. Not in cologne, but in presence. It's why her friends don't bring your name up. It makes her go quiet. It's why she doesn't block you, but she doesn't reach out either. Because she doesn't want to admit what she lost, especially not to herself. Philosophers still debate whether it's better to be loved deeply and lost, or never known at all. But for her, the answer is painful and simple. She wishes she could forget, and she can't. Remember when she used to tease you about how calm you were? Called you unbothered like it was a flaw. Now she meets men who over-explain, overreact, overstep, and she thinks back to you. To the silence that wasn't empty. To the quiet that wasn't cold. You were rare. Not because you had perfect hair or a six-pack, but because you carried stillness in a world addicted to noise. Because when she told you about her day, you actually listened. Not nodded, listened. Not replied with that sucks and a shrug, but followed up the next day. You remembered her dad's name. You knew the difference between when she said I'm fine and when she meant it. You laughed at her weird inside jokes, the ones no one else found funny. You told her the truth even when it wasn't convenient. And maybe, just maybe, she thought you'd always be there. Spoiler alert, she was wrong. Now she's dating a guy who doesn't notice when she cuts her hair, who thinks emotional safety is a yoga term, who says you're overthinking when she tries to open up. And whether she admits it or not, she compares. Not in every detail, not all the time, but in the quiet moments when he walks out of the room, when the laughter dies down, that's when you show up. Uninvited, unforgettable. Some men leave behind a mess, you left behind a mirror, and now she has to face who she was when she was with you. You didn't chase validation. You didn't hand out compliments like coupons. You saw her, really saw her, and that's the kind of attention you can't fake and she'll never forget. Noticed how she always tied her hoodie strings into a knot when she was anxious. How her voice dropped a pitch when she was scared but didn't want to show it. How she said, I'm tired, when what she meant was, I feel empty. You didn't react with panic. You didn't try to fix her. You just looked at her the same way someone watches a sunset, quiet, unrushed present. Because sometimes the rarest thing you can give a woman isn't romance or reassurance. It's attention without agenda. Philosophers still debate whether the soul can be known or only interpreted, but you knew that the surface never told the full story. You didn't just love her face. You loved the flicker behind her eyes, the storm she was hiding, the dreams she didn't dare say out loud. And that kind of presence, it's rare. It doesn't come from scrolling through dating advice. It comes from actually caring, from listening to her without planning your reply, from remembering that she hates cinnamon, not because she's picky, but because it reminds her of a childhood Christmas that ended in a police report. You didn't treat her sadness like a problem. You treated it like a place she could invite you into slowly. And she did. Now imagine what that felt like for her. A world full of men who stare at her body but never ask about the tattoo on her ankle, the one she got after her grandmother died. A sea of DMs saying you're hot while you said you looked distracted today. What's on your mind? You weren't just an exception, you were a contrast. And contrasts don't fade, they sharpen over time. Let's be honest, you probably made her uncomfortable sometimes. Not because you were wrong, but because you were real. Because your presence asked her to show up honestly, too. And that's terrifying when you're used to performing. Quirky observation time. You even knew her dog's name and still remembered its birthday. Not because you're obsessed with pets, but because the things she cared about mattered to you by default. And it wasn't a strategy. You weren't trying to win her over. You just didn't know how to pretend to be half present. Fast forward to now. She's probably posting quotes about healing and protecting her peace. But what she doesn't say is this: you were the first man who made her feel safe enough to unfold. Not unfold like a beach chair on a sunny day, but unfold like a letter she'd been too afraid to read. And now that letter is closed again. Now she's guarded again. Now she's surrounded by men who bring attention, but not presence. And deep down, that feels like a downgrade. Not because you were perfect. You weren't. You probably forgot to text back sometimes. Maybe you didn't always know the right thing to say. Maybe you even left a few dishes in the sink and forgot her coworker's name that one time. But you gave her something else. Something bigger. You gave her the feeling of being held emotionally, not just touched physically. That's the kind of thing that builds slowly, that lives in the details. And it's also the kind of thing that once lost makes everything after feel slightly empty. She might find someone more charming. She might find someone richer, but she won't find someone who sees her like you did because you weren't looking at what was convenient. You were looking for what was real, and real is unforgettable. You didn't say yes to everything. You didn't let love turn into self-erasure. And in a world where too many men either dominate or disappear, that kind of balance was shocking in the best way. You were kind, yes, but you had a spine. You weren't a pushover in a nice shirt. When something felt off, you didn't bury it under a fake smile. You brought it up. You spoke calmly, not aggressively. And when her behavior crossed the line, you didn't explode, you stepped back. You weren't afraid of the uncomfortable conversations. You knew that silence, when it's used to avoid conflict, is just slow poison. Philosophers still debate whether compromise is a virtue or a trap, but you already knew the answer: compromise has limits, and yours were rooted in self-respect. You didn't stay just to keep the peace. You didn't shrink to avoid rocking the boat. Because you understood something most people don't. Peace isn't the absence of noise, it's the presence of alignment. She probably tested you. Not because she was evil, but because that's what people do when they're unsure of their own worth. She needed to know if you would abandon yourself to keep her, and when you didn't. She may not have said it out loud, but she felt it. Respect. That moment you calmly said, "I love you, but I won't allow this." That's what hit harder than any flowers or flirty text ever could. And yes, maybe it caused a fight. Maybe there was a night of silence, but deep down something shifted. She realized this man doesn't beg to be liked. He chooses to be here, and he can choose to leave. Quirky observation. You were the guy who would walk her to her car in the rain, but you'd also walk away from a situation where you were being emotionally toyed with. That duality, that soft hands but steel in the eyes kind of energy, it's rare. And rare things haunt us. Because most men either fold too easily or fake toughness to mask insecurity. But you knew that saying no doesn't make you mean, it makes you honest. That keeping your standards high doesn't mean you don't love her, it means you love yourself too. Now that you're gone, she may be with someone who bends too quickly, who says, "Sure, babe," even when he's biting his tongue, who thinks avoiding confrontation is the same as being a good man. And in some strange way, she misses your friction. Not because it was aggressive, but because it was real. It meant something. Remember that time you didn't reply for hours after she sent a passive-aggressive message, and when you finally did, you said, "Let's talk when we're both calm, I don't do games." She screenshotted that. She showed her friends. Half of them said, "He's cold." The other half said, "No, he's a man." Now she knows. Now she sees what most of them never did. You weren't withholding love, you were protecting your dignity. And here's the thing: she didn't lose you because you didn't care. She lost you because you refused to care at your own expense. That kind of energy doesn't walk back through the door. It doesn't come back with a dozen roses. It doesn't text you up at 2 a.m. It walks out once and never looks over its shoulder. And when she thinks back on what you gave her: love, presence, depth, and boundaries, she'll realize it was everything she didn't know she needed. Until you were gone. You didn't try to change her. You didn't give her a checklist of who she needed to become to earn your affection. But somehow, just by being you, she started changing. Not out of fear, not out of shame, but out of something rarer belief. You believed in her before she did. Before she posted the art, pitched the idea, signed up for the class. Before the world clapped for her, you were already clapping. Philosophers still debate whether love should be unconditional or earned. But you knew better. You gave her the one condition that mattered most, grow, not for me, for you. You didn't make her feel like a project. You made her feel like a possibility. And for the first time, she started seeing herself through someone else's steady gaze, not judgmental, not demanding, just clear and honest. You didn't sugarcoat her excuses. You didn't entertain her self sabotage. You called it like you saw it, not harshly, but directly. When she said, "I'll never be good at that," you raised an eyebrow and said, "Says who?" That moment, that changed something. Real world reference. Think of those old coaches who barely speak, but when they say you've got this, you know they mean it. You were that coach, except instead of drills and whistles, you gave her a soft place to land, and then a reason to leap again. Quirky observation. She once joked about starting a bakery even though she couldn't bake. You showed up with a secondhand recipe book and said, "Let's ruin the kitchen this weekend." You turned jokes into action and ideas into plans. And the wild part, you never made her feel small for not having it all figured out. You met her where she was and stood beside her, not ahead. There's a reason she still hesitates before deleting old photos. It's not about nostalgia. It's about who she was when you were around and who she was becoming. You didn't interrupt her growth with criticism. You fertilized it with patience. You didn't demand results. You trusted the process. Now, after you, she meets men who want her to be more, but don't offer more. Men who ask her to be softer, quieter, prettier, but couldn't tell you the last book she read or the dream she gave up on. They say, "I support you," but somehow she still feels alone. With you, she never had to trade her ambition for affection. She could be messy and magnetic, flawed and worthy. You made space for contradictions and held them gently. And that's why it hurts. Because now, when she tries to explain what she lost, the words don't land. It wasn't a job or a status or even a relationship. It was a mirror that showed her who she could be before she was ready to see it for herself. Maybe she outgrew who she was, but she never outgrew what you gave her, that gift of belief. It still echoes every time she doubts herself, every time she hesitates, every time she starts something and almost stops. But here's your voice in her head saying, keep going. You didn't need her to need you. You wanted her to become someone who didn't. And that's exactly why she regrets losing you, because most men want to feel needed. You you wanted her to feel powerful, and she did. You didn't panic when things got hard. You didn't flinch when life threw sharp corners. And in a world where emotional chaos is the default, you were the exception. You were calm. Not because you had no battles, but because you didn't broadcast them. You kept your center, even when the people around you lost theirs. And she noticed. She might have teased you for being too chill, but that chill, that quiet strength became the thing she leaned on when the walls started cracking. Philosophers still debate whether composure is learned or innate. But you didn't wait for the answer. You practiced it. Stressful day at work. You didn't take it out on her, a fight with family. You didn't ghost her or dump your emotions like a flood. You sat with it, processed it, then showed up with steady hands. Quirky observation. You were the guy who could fold laundry during an argument not out of disrespect, but because you knew not every conflict had to come with fireworks. You listened more than you spoke. And when you spoke, you didn't raise your voice, you raised the clarity. That's rare. She knew it, even if she didn't say it at the time. When her mood swung, you didn't match it. When she cried without knowing why, you didn't ask her to explain. You just held her until the words came. You weren't the fix-it guy. You were the hold-it-together guy. Now she finds herself with men who get defensive at the first sign of vulnerability, who call her too much when she's just being real, who disappear when life gets a little too life. And suddenly your quiet presence feels louder than ever. Because calmness isn't passive, it's power without performance. There's a reason she felt safe around you. You didn't judge her for being messy. You didn't try to organize her emotions into a spreadsheet. You just stayed. When she felt like she was falling apart, you became the soft ground beneath her. You didn't promise to fix everything, you promised not to run. And you kept that promise. Even when it got hard for you, remember that one time she had a breakdown over something small, like a canceled plan or a rude comment at work, and halfway through her crying, she looked up and said, "Why aren't you saying anything?" And you said, "Because you don't need advice right now. You need to breathe." That was the moment. That's the line that comes back to her sometimes when she's arguing with someone who doesn't get it. When she's begging someone else to listen, not solve. It wasn't that you had no problems. It was that you didn't project them. You handled your storm so she could survive hers. Even during your own bad days, you stayed steady. You didn't dump. You didn't dramatize. You didn't disappear. And now she meets men who react to everything, who confuse anger for strength, who think shutting down is a power move. But you breathed. And that breath, that pause, that ability to stay with her, even when she wasn't easy to be with, that's what she didn't realize was gold until it was gone. When people talk about emotional safety, they're not talking about bubble baths and Spotify playlists. They're talking about you, the man who could sit in the middle of the storm and still make her feel like the world wasn't ending. That's unforgettable. You weren't flashy. You didn't need to be the loudest guy in the room, the wittiest texter, or the best dressed at dinner, but somehow all eyes found you anyway, especially hers. You weren't trying to impress. You were just consistent. And in a world where so many people chase validation, your quiet confidence was magnetic. You didn't post every workout. You didn't fish for compliments. You weren't glued to your phone during conversations waiting for a dopamine hit from hearts and likes. Instead, you noticed small things, like how she picked at her nails when she was nervous, like how she never finished her coffee but always ordered it anyway. Philosophers still debate the nature of humility, whether it's truly selfless or just a subtler form of ego. But with you, there was no debate. You didn't act humble. You were. And that kind of groundedness, it's an emotional luxury most people never experience. Quirky observation. You were the guy who never bragged about your playlist, but somehow always cued the exact song she didn't know she needed to hear. Even your Spotify had emotional intelligence. You had presence, not performance. And that difference mattered. Because here's what most men never realize: charm wears off. Looks fade, game gets old, but presence stays. You didn't steal the room, you centered it. Not with volume, but with steadiness. When her world spun out, you didn't throw solutions at her like darts. You just existed beside her, without pressure, without ego, without making her healing journey about you. That's rare. Because most men either want to be heroes or victims. You didn't want to be either. You just wanted to be there. And now that you're gone, she's surrounded by men who overshare, overcompensate, overpromise, who talk too much and listen too little. Men who make their ambition louder than their integrity. Men who perform kindness like a TikTok trend. Men who hold doors but can't hold space. But you didn't need applause. You didn't need recognition. You didn't need her to say, "You're the best." You already knew your value. And ironically, that's exactly what made you unforgettable. Because it's not that you didn't care, it's that you cared quietly. You celebrated her success without inserting yourself. You encouraged her growth without turning it into your resume. You supported her without needing credit. Remember when she got good news and you just said, "Let's go celebrate, you picked the place," no ego. No backhanded compliments, just joy, just presence. And that joy, that low-key, steady, unshakable support, that's what she misses now. Not the show, not the status, not the filters and highlight reels. She misses the silence between your sentences, the way your calm didn't demand attention but commanded trust. Because you weren't trying to be remembered. You were just being real. And real lingers. Even when she didn't know how to say what she was feeling, you made her feel like she didn't have to. You didn't demand explanations. You gave her space, and more importantly, you made that space feel sacred. It's one thing to be loved, it's another to be safe. And you were both. You didn't flinch when she broke down. You didn't walk out when her anxiety got messy. You didn't label her too emotional when she admitted she was scared. You just stayed. Steady. Still. Silent in the most healing way. Philosophers still debate what it means to hold space for someone, but you did it naturally, without needing a textbook or a script. You were the kind of man who didn't just hear her, you absorbed her. Her words, her moods, her energy. She could exhale around you, and she didn't even realize how rare that was until it was gone. Real world reference. It's like driving a car with perfect suspension. You don't notice it until you switch to a car that rattles with every bump. You were that smooth ride through life's potholes, and now she feels every jolt. The men she meets now, they try. Some talk a good game, some even say the right things, but none of them feel like you. Because you didn't offer comfort as a reward for good behavior. You offered it because that's just who you were. You didn't hold her when she was soft and romantic. You held her when she was moody, difficult, distant. And now she's left wondering, who else will do that? Quirky observation. You were the kind of guy who never corrected her pronunciation but remembered her coffee order down to the extra half shot and almond milk. That combination of tenderness and attention, that's what made you safe. Even in arguments, you didn't threaten to leave. You didn't weaponize silence. You didn't punish her vulnerability. You stayed present even when your ego wanted to escape. That kind of emotional maturity is invisible until it's missing. Now she's surrounded by men who talk about communication but don't know how to listen, who demand accountability but disappear when asked to show up, who say I'm here for you until things get too real. You weren't perfect. You had your off days, you got tired, you made mistakes. But your love had structure, it had rhythm, it had roots. And that grounded energy, that's what allowed her to grow. Not because you told her how, but because you made it safe enough to try. And the moment you left, or maybe the moment she pushed you away, that safety left too. Now every man she meets is being compared to something she can't quite explain. A feeling, a calm, a presence. It wasn't just that you made her laugh, or made her feel attractive, or said all the right things. It was that in your presence she stopped bracing for disappointment. And that is what she regrets losing most. She may smile when your name comes up. She might even laugh and say, we weren't right for each other. But if you listen closely, there's always a pause, a flicker in her voice, a tiny fracture in her calm. Because she remembers, not just you, but who she was when she was with you. She was softer then, stronger too. She laughed more, cried less, trusted herself more than she second guessed. And now she's fine. She posts her highlights, she gets her nails done, she texts someone new. But none of them see her like you did. None of them feel like home. None of them ask, are you really okay, and mean it. Because what you gave her wasn't just attention, it was a reflection. It was acceptance. It was space, the kind where she could unfold without fear of being mishandled. And that's not something people move on from. That's something they carry quietly, sometimes for years. There's a difference between being missed and being mourned. You weren't just a chapter. You were the part of the story that made the rest feel empty after it ended. So if you've ever wondered, does she regret it? Know this. It doesn't always look like regret. Sometimes it looks like a long pause before she says, I'm happy now. Sometimes it sounds like her talking about her current partner and suddenly going silent. And sometimes it's just a look. That look when she's alone at a stoplight, when a song comes on, when the wind feels just a little too familiar. Because the kind of man who listens, who leads without shouting, who sees without staring, who holds without controlling, he doesn't fade. He becomes a measuring stick, a question, a memory that feels too sharp to touch but too sacred to forget. So no, she may never admit it, not to her friends, not to her new partner, not even to herself. But somewhere deep down in the part of her that still believes in real connection, she knows exactly what she lost. And she'll feel it in quiet moments for the rest of her life. End of script. Have a beautiful day.